Hi everyone, welcome back to Front Decoder. Today I want to explain one of the core concepts in Angular, data sharing between components. Let's break it down. In Angular, there are three main ways to share data between components. First, the most common approach is traditional data sharing using @sign input and @sign output from the Angular core module. @sign input allows data to flow down from parent to a child component, while @sign output enables sending data up from a child to its parent. Second, for unrelated components, we have the reactive approach, which leverages services and observables to share data dynamically. Finally, starting with Angular 17, differable views offer a powerful way to handle data sharing in more flexible and efficient manner. Now, let's dive into each method one by one. Now, I just want to use the previous code from error handling in Angular. Now, I make a component with Angular CLI and I name it to-do list. Yes, I have the component. Inside to-do list component, there's nothing. I just copy the name of the component and I import it in app component. Great. Now, in app.component, I just transfer the card from app component inside the to-do list component. Fantastic. I have some errors. First, I import common module from Angular/core. Now, about another error. First, I implement on init. I write constructor, but how can I remove the errors? The solution is @sign input. But what is @sign input? Imagine this. You have two boxes, big box that's a parent, small box or child inside it. Now the big box wants to tell the small box something like, hey little box, your color should be red. In Angular, that's exactly what @sign input does. It lets the parent component send data down to a child component. In simple words, @sign input a magic label that says, hey Angular, this thing comes from the parent. It's how components talk from parent to child. Now we assign to-do to @sign input and we assign our interface to our @sign input. Yes. Now in to-do in app component, I just use to-do property on to-do list tag and I bind it to the item. With this technique, I just send item from parent to the child component. Now I replace them. Great. Nothing here. Now, if you look at the browser, it works. Let's start to explain @sign output. Imagine our two boxes again. Now it's time for the small box to talk back. The small box finishes its job and says, hey big box, I finished painting red. That's what @sign output does. It lets the child component send a message back to the parent component. In simple words, @sign output a magic megaphone. It lets the child shout back to the parent, hey, something happened. Now let's start to implement @sign output. @sign output is a kind of event that we should assign it to a new event emitter from @Angular/core. Now we define an event toggle, and inside our event I just change status of the boolean to completed, and then I emit the new value to the parent, from child to a parent component. Now inside our template I just define a button. Yes, btn primary. Now I use click event and I bind toggle to our click event. Now in parent I use toggle completed method to untoggle to do, and I bind it event. Now in the parent I define untoggle to do. Fantastic. And here I simply update the to-do list with new status that it comes from the child component. Here I just check the to-dos. If it's not, just return. And now I map over to-dos to update the list. Great. Now in completed, update to-do.complete. If it's not, just return to-do. Great. Now if we look at the browser, if you can see, if I click, it changes. Sometimes in our Angular applications, we need to share data between unrelated components. For example, if you look at this component tree, you'll see that component A and component B share a common parent, making it straightforward to pass data between them. But what about sharing data between, say, component A2 and component B1, which don't have a direct parent-child relationship? Could we use @output to send data up the component tree and then drill it down with @input to reach the destination? While possible, this approach can get messy and complex. There is where reactive data sharing shines. By leveraging RxJS and Angular services, we can share data between unrelated components. But how does it work? Let's break it down. In order to use reactive pattern for sharing data between unrelated components, first we need some modifications in our main service. At the beginning, we define a new behavior subject from RxJS. I call it to-do list subject. Great. Then I make a public observable, and I use as observable method from RxJS to convert subject to observable. Fantastic. In our get to-do list, I use pipe operator and I use tab from RxJS methods, and I next the value into the to-do list subject. Why? Because I get the newest data. Fantastic. Now, for simplicity, I transfer update to do completion from inside the component into the service. Oops, I write it wrong. Now I make a constant current list and I get the value of the subject by .getValue method. Now here first I check the current list and then I make a new list. Why? Because I want to get, as I told you before, the updated version of completed, and then next it to the to-do list observable. Yes, here I check the completed. Now at the end, I say this to-do list subject next. Now in the service, we do all the things. Now we back to app.component to modify some codes. First, in ng init, I use main service.todo list observable to get the data through this observable. Now I set the to-dos to to-do list, and here I check if we have to-dos. I just set has error to false. Great. Now in the subscribe, we don't need next. Fantastic. And as you can see in our main service, I transfer the logic of on toggle to do inside the service. Now I use update to do completion method from main service. And here I forgot to implement unsubscription. Now I use a new subject destroy to unsubscribe from a service. After take one, I use take until, and I pass destroy subject into the take until, and I use undestroy method from @Angular/core. Now in ng destroy, I next the destroy and then I complete the destroy. Great. Now, in order to implement unrelated component scenario in our application, I make a component to-do stats to display status of to-dos and completion. First, I make two observables, completed count and total count. Now in our component, I use main service and I inject it through the constructor. In ng init, I assign completed count to main.service.todo list observable, and through a map operator from RxJS, I return to-dos that they are completed. Here I use filter method through the RxJS. Now the another variable that is total count is assigned to main service.todo list observable, and just return the total count of to-dos with .length. Great. Now in the template, I write common module and async pipe. Now in our to-do stats template, I just use the alert class from Bootstrap to display some text. That it is completed count with async pipe, and in another line I display total count. Great. Now in our app component, I just import TodoStats. Now I use its tag. Great. And if I look at the browser, it works. But here, when I click on toggle completed, something wrong happened because I didn't write return. Now it works now. Fantastic. All right, let's wrap it up. In Angular, there are multiple main ways to share data between components. First, traditional data sharing with @input and @output for parent-child communication. Second, the reactive approach using services and RxJS for unrelated components. That's it in a nutshell. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends.